It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
I feel like it's live every Friday at some time before 10. Hopefully, depending on how well we wake up and get into our seats. Something like that, right?
Well, I'm definitely not awake, Tim.
It's
I may look dressed, but I felt like I just rolled out of bed.
It's between 8:45 and 9 o'clock on the dot. It's between that range there somewhere. So
you probably like next year going to want to do this like at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Wait, I'm not the one who pushed us this early. This was you. This was you.
Oh, I was trying to do like a later show. And you're like, no, I can't do it later.
Oh, I can't do it later. No,
I got family stuff.
Yeah. No, Friday's usually the day that that my wife and I get to go out for a little bit and spend some time shopping for food for the next week.
Okay.
And also go out to dinner a little bit, things like that. So right. Usually, this week's a little bit different for us, but yeah. So how you sleeping, Mark?
I don't know, Tim. I've been sleep's been off a bit. I don't know why. It's been just kind of a weird cycle, and I haven't been able to get back on track. I don't know. Maybe I don't think I'm stressed about too many things.
I was gonna say, do you think it's a different between the academic load versus
maybe because it's interesting. This week we kind of, and I could talk a little bit about the projects that we started to wrap up this week. Some of the projects
are you completely off? I know you're detoxing from AWS consultants. Are you completely off of AWS consultants?
We're still working with one who's with us till the last week in October.
Oh, okay. All right. But that's been a big shift, right?
Yeah, that's because the responsibility has been shifting. Our workload's been increasing because we don't have any other AWS developers to help us build stuff and maintain our infrastructure. So yeah, that's been a learning experience, but no, it's been good. It's just like I said, maybe it's subconsciously all the kind of the stuff that I have to kind of keep in my head and kind of manage on a daily basis, and also from a project management standpoint because we are a small team, and we were talking about that yesterday internally.
You're getting more responsibilities because of the leaving consultants. Yes, am I right to understand?
Absolutely, yeah. And also thinking about us as a very small developer team within it's a small to medium sized company.
Yeah. How big? Can you talk about numbers? Like how big is your
around
dev
team? 60 employees.
So 60 people in the company. Mm-hmm. And then how big is the dev team? Mark's like, well, it's me and
3 or 4.
Really? 3 or 4. So yeah, 3 or 4 developers.
Yes, so, I would say 3 developers, and then you probably have the fourth is administrator, and then we do have.
Wait, when you say administrator, you're talking about like ops, like infrastructure
Correct.
Administration? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And then we also have like a Salesforce administrator. We have also like a data engineer, data analyst. So we have other technical people that may not be tied directly to our developing team, a very small team that we have, but we definitely work closely with them, every day. So
it's 60, and then you said, I mean, you're talking about you said 3 developers.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Versus, and then you got, and then some ops and data analysts, things that developers may also do. Depending on your team structure, you may have a developer who does that, but in this case, you have someone who's all right. I'm getting to feel that. Yeah, that feels.
It kind of feels. You know what it feels like, Tim?
What does it feel like?
It feels like a startup within a startup.
Oh boy, not this. A startup within a startup. That's what That's what all the enterprisey companies. But you are a startup, aren't you?
Technically, yeah. We've only been about 2.5 years old, so still kind of in that startup mode. We do have, we're not like a startup that doesn't have a product or doesn't have a platform and just, is just trying to raise VC money and not trying to work with customers and clients. We actually have real customers and, and you would say working on bringing on revenue. So that's kind of an active part of the business. We're not like a startup who just wants to, hopes and dreams that we're built on, right?
And you're, I mean, without going too much into things you probably can't talk about, it feels like an interesting place because some of the funding or the investment is coming from institutions or is coming from things that are related to the institutions that are actually your customers as well.
Yeah, the biggest funding source that basically launched the startup was from a big grant from the state of North Carolina.
And you're serving the higher education universities and things like that of North Carolina, right?
Within North Carolina. Yep.
Yeah. So
That's the primary mission. Yep.
that's not a bad situation to be in. That's for sure. So
yeah, that's good. So yeah, I'm enjoying it. We just kind of came to the end of releasing a couple features this week, which is interesting. And I was thinking about this, how I could talk about this in a very kind of general way, because something actually came out of our yesterday's meetings that I actually thought was pretty informative, because I gave like a short talk, or not really a demo, because it was, some of these features are kind of hard to demo because they're all built on data pipelines that run in certain time frames and sequences, and it's kind of hard to do like a live demonstration of that. But I was showing kind of the different components and parts and pieces of it, and then talking about it from it was a technical presentation. So mostly giving presentation to definitely our internal team, then the other technical team members, and maybe as part of other departments, just so they're kind of aware of what we built and how it's working, and also the limitations, and also future considerations if we want to enhance it. Because I think I mentioned to you that we added this document flow feature. Basically,
sounds familiar. Yeah,
to take documents from
you were extracting from Salesforce or something.
Yeah.
Right?
So when I could, like I said, I think I could talk about this in a very kind of general way. That when our students submit applications for our programs, the form would look like any other academic application they need to. If you're registering for a program or for a course. But one feature that we did not have that was a requirement for one of our institutions was for them to upload a document. I won't say what the document is, but it was just to upload a document as part of their application. And so we need to have a pipeline that we could then ingest that document and then have it basically send it off to our institution, because the end goal of we're not the end goal, but like one of the first things that we wanted to provide for institutions is a way to take in applications, for the programs that we provide, for the online programs. And so we need to pass that document along with the rest of the application information to the institution. So this was a new feature, and we kind of think about, okay, how can we get this document, make it flow through our system? Because our system has primarily just been working with like data, moving data through it. And document is data, but it's a file, so it's definitely something we had to kind of. It's a little bit different, and what we actually use for the front end,
because a lot of your data would be structured, right? And this is going to be an unstructured
semi-structured
PDF type of a thing.
Correct. Well, that's the interesting part of the way we built it. They could upload basically we did limit the image formats, but they could upload any image. So I'm assuming if they want to take of this document that we're asking them to submit, they could take a photograph of it, or maybe scan it in. And so it may come in as like a PNG or TIFF file, or, JPEG. And then we need to make sure that it gets converted to a PDF so that we can package it up and make sure that it's ready to go for the institution. Right. So we use Salesforce. I think I talked about this. I'm getting a pretty knowledgeable of the Salesforce ecosystem, because that is kind of a new thing of kind of learning about that and seeing how the integrations that we have. So we do use a Salesforce application for our front end, not every application that we have, but just basically for this specific application to the students would use to register for the courses. We use Salesforce for that. And so we think, okay, how can we integrate with Salesforce to kind of get this document and kind of make it move through the system here? So what we had to do was kind of work with their API. So that was interesting, kind of learning about Salesforce API, which actually I'm pretty impressed. I think it actually their API interface, the way that, especially their documentation, I think for the API docs, I think are really, really good. And the way that the APIs are structured in a sense in regards to like the objects, the models, I think actually are pretty good.
It is very like object. From my exposure to Salesforce, it's very object related. Like one object leads to other objects in their API. Yeah.
So if you're used to a relational, database experience, right, and kind of understand like your primary foreign keys and can understand relationships between tables or objects, it makes sense, right? So
how well do they do though expressing that through? What I'm guessing is a RESTful-ish API, maybe? No.
Yes. Well, they do have. That's the interesting thing about their API is it's pretty feature full, I guess. I'm not sure. Like I said, Tim, I'm tired. This is going to be a mess today. But it has a lot of features, and one way you could access it with GraphQL, which I know we talked about in the past. You're not a fan of that,
no.
Or they have a REST interface, and they have I think they use. I don't know if they have a socket interface. I don't know. They have a few interface types that you can access their API with.
Socket, like interesting. So you can get real-time information?
I think so. Yeah. Like I said, it's interesting how they have different ways to both authenticate and also interact with their API, which is really, really interesting. So in order to get these documents, we had to interface directly with their API to get these files and with this process here. So kind of setting this all up, because what I want to kind of discuss with you, one thing I learned through this presentation was that, kind of working with other team members and getting their feedback, and kind of working, especially if you present something and then they ask, oh, well, could we, is this, or could we kind of do this in a different way, or could we, or is there like a security issue with this, kind of, for them to add notes and kind of to add comments to it, I think is definitely valuable. And it's always thing we take in consideration as we think about, version 2 or 3 and think about how we can enhance it. But one comment came up, which I thought was actually super interesting, which I want to kind of see if maybe if you've dealt with it before, because the way that we work with our Salesforce application and then also our internal platform is with, like, say, a multi-tenancy model. So we have multiple customers, and they basically have like one big data lake, but then we work with, like, data pipelines, but it's still a multi-tenancy platform. It is. Now we do hold to compliance standards by make sure the data is segmented and is private in regards to each client. So, based on location of where it is in the data lake, and then we could set permissions with that so that, they're, one IG can, or one, now I'm starting to get acronyms that we use internally. One customer cannot, data cannot touch the other customer's data. So we do, within our data lake, we have a lot of controls around that and how we structure the data lake, especially with data lake formation in AWS and data lake permissions. You can have a lot of control over that.
And data lake is just a way to define relationships between, say, disparate data sources.
Yes, and primarily we use S3, and then glue databases on top of that. So that's primarily what we use. But just kind of, but the nice thing about that, though, is that you provide a high level of security, right? Because you have a high level of control, so you can set permissions, roles-based permissions on both the processes and also user access on different parts of the data, right? So we do
some crawl process would be operating on behalf of a customer. And
so do a really good job of that. And like I said, from having, it's interesting, and this is something I learned about, is like having a multi-tenancy application, but then having a lot of controls around that. So even though you're sharing, let's say, resources, and you're sharing maybe some pipelines here or there, but how the data is segmented, you could enable a multi-tenancy platform, but still separate the data out. So you don't have to worry about it all being commingled. Right. So if you have all your data in, let's say, a relational MySQL database, which you know a lot about, so like all your data is together, right? You could have some role-based table permissions. You could definitely establish that.
It's usually not on the data. It's on the application layer. The application layer is saying, however I access this data, I'm going to make sure that I add something to the query or check something in the result that ensures I don't return data I shouldn't return.
Yeah.
You're saying from a data lake perspective, you're able to say, hey, this process is running on behalf of this customer. Therefore, it can only be able to crawl into S3 objects that are owned by another. It's like that's at a high level. You can't even have access to the data. That's interesting.
Yeah. And if you
how do you deal though with like structured data? Is it just, you're just putting, like, when you say S3, you're saying like JSON or CSV or
it could be files. It could be it could either a combination of mostly JSON, sometimes CSV files, depending upon how we're transforming or moving the data.
And then you have permission that just means,
and then Parquet files that we usually transform them to. But yeah,
so then only certain customers, I say customers,
it's
only like a permission model that relate to a customer can access that.
What you can use is, let's say, definitely the bucket level permissions, which you know all about.
Right. Yeah.
That's pretty easy. But then you could also do partition based, kind of as a data source, right? So partitions think of it as like directories or folders, a folder structure within like an S3 bucket. And then you could establish, let's say, a partition as a data source that then you can then put permissions around.
And do you use Dynamo or anything like that?
You use Dynamo for some data tracking. We don't do.
Does that do the same thing though in terms of permissions? Can you take a key and say, hey, this only these IAM roles can access this key? Like that's where I start to.
Yeah, it gets to be a little bit
how
tricky. Yeah, so what we use DynamoDB currently, and then we think about how we could, because I'm also always thinking about how we could use DynamoDB for more kind of adding more features to the platform. But what we mostly use it is for some state management with the jobs, so that when we run a pipeline,
so it is application layer data. It's
correct
managing how the application is processing, not customer data.
Like we may store some metadata around our data in the data lake for, let's say, like I said, to kind of track the data a little bit between, because as we're transferring the data, we want to know the data started here and ended here, and you want to know the status of that. So we may store a little metadata around the data, but really like anything like, any PI or any important pieces of data for our customers, we don't store that in DynamoDB.
And that's interesting because so you're saying the bulk or the majority, or maybe all of really your customer data is not
I'm
in
getting really detailed here, but I think I'm doing okay. I think I'm talking about this more of a high level,
at a high level. Yeah, yeah. It's
little disclaimer here. I need like a legal disclaimer here.
This is data it's not in, like you say, it's not a relational database where we'd normally store data like this.
Yeah.
It's in files that are in buckets that have permissions and things like that.
Which that's been an interesting my experience. Like I said, before this job, I had like a lot of experience. Like S3.
Do you use the AWS layers that let you query it as if it is SQL data?
Yeah, you could have Athena. You could do that. Yep.
Do you use that, and how does that work with, like, does the query have a IAM concept so it won't query it into buckets? Or
correct. So Athena so the user that's using Athena, basically it's the role of the user accessing Athena, because Athena is Amazon's SQL interface, right? So it's very, very simple, text box. You could type SQL into it. You could select databases that you want to use, and
databases may just be S3 buckets that are treated as databases, right?
True. Yeah. So what,
or data sources that you've assembled? I forget how.
Oh no, I can explain it. Yeah, I think because it's interesting to understand how this works. So you have S3, which basically like your raw data source, right? So that's where your files, like your JSON, your Parquet files, and then what you could do is you could have a glue crawler crawl those data sources, those buckets, or those partitions with those buckets, and then you could tell that crawler to then load it into this database, load like the schema into this database. So they go through the files. It would look like the structure of the files. And then if you say, okay, for this file that's being loaded, look at the structure, depending if it's a JSON structure, then basically create a database out of that and load that data into a database. But then you can then query with Athena. But when you're querying, it's interesting. You are querying the files. All the database is from a glue perspective.
It's basically like a structure, right?
The structure, the schema. Yeah.
It helps you know how you're going to. Okay. Interesting.
Yep.
So I just want to take a pause here, because like one way to do multi-tenancy in like a SaaS style app is actually to spin up a database for every customer.
Yes. Yep.
And say, so it's just your data. And I mean, I'm almost 100% sure that's how, say, Atlassian does it for Jira and Confluence, because of how they've sold their product in the past. I think the cloud is just a cloud.
That's an interesting note there. Wow, that must be a lot of work to maintain.
You know what I mean? Like, because Jira originally, I don't know the entire history of it, but generally speaking, you would get a license that you would run on-prem, and you'd have your Jira database, and the old school Jira administrators would know how to actually go in and do things to the database directly.
Wow.
And now they're struggling because Atlassian is rolling that back, and Atlassian is saying, no, we don't sell, it's becoming very hard to get on-prem licenses for Jira, like their grandfathered in now, because they're not selling them anymore. And if you're going to come and work, if you're going to have an Atlassian contract, you're going to use their cloud service, which is basically saying we host the data. But it also means now if you want to do anything custom with your Jira installation, you have to use their API. You can't just go there and, like fire up the database and move around your tasks and your issues the way you want, like people were used to in the past. You can see it went from pretty much, if you can understand our structure, you can do whatever you want with your data, to now you have to go through our API. But because of that evolution of how they've sold the product makes me think that on the cloud system, they're probably spinning up a database, because that's how their software was developed. It was like a database that ran in your data center and had all your data on it. So if you're going to make a cloud version of that, you're just going to have a bunch of little databases. So one way to do multi-tenancy for a web app is to, your new customer, spin up a new instance of this database that's yours. It's performant, right? Because you don't have to worry about, like, does the guy with 1 million rows, like with 1 million contacts, 1 million users, 1 million documents, 1 million tasks, 1 million or whatever the thing your application does, is his 1 million affecting the performance of my 13? You don't have to worry about that, because each is a single database. And what you're describing with Athena and the way you have your data lake structured makes me feel like it's practically similar, in that you're saying, here, Athena, ingest this data for this customer And now you have what is essentially that customer's database separate from everybody else's because of the permission model.
Oh, I think I just leave it there, Tim. I think that's good. I think, yeah. You said it, I didn't. So I
mean, that's really interesting because it
Yeah.
is just the other way to do multi-tenancy. It's for sure more difficult.
Yeah.
Because you've got it from an operational standpoint, you have to think about, well, how do I spin up all these databases? How do I manage these database connections? And I have to have a database of databases.
And the management, you're right. From a performance aspect, it can be more performant to have each customer on their own database, depending upon how those databases are hosted, like the processes, the resources that are allocated for those databases. That could definitely be have more performance features with it. But at the same time, though, from a management perspective,
yeah.
Oh my, like to update a schema across multiple databases, to do migrations, do rollbacks, to do, different versioning of databases. It's like, that would be a huge pain, a huge management cost on top of that.
There have been, say, other SaaS applications that customers that use our application tend to want to integrate with. And so we've kind of seen some of those integration pains with people that have done multi-tenancy this way, where it's like, was your account made before 2023? Maybe that API doesn't work because we didn't upgrade your database.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's those same things where, why is this different with our test? Like we just ran it against our test sandbox account and it just worked fine. But this customer's having, when did they sign up? As soon as you ask, like, when did they sign up, it's some type of migration question. Yeah. And when it's about the structure of your data, that just signals you're doing multi-tenancy by spinning up everybody has their own database, which again, it's performance is great because you're essentially sharding on customer.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all the data is sharded on customer. But then you have some other, like I said, you need the database of databases. Because like when you log in, where do you log in? Something saying that Tim's account points to this database instance. You have the overhead of a bunch of instances. Like how are you running that? I mean, maybe it's easy because you can create. This isn't the way that I do it, right? But
well, that's also the benefit of like the way that with S3 and with this glue architecture, and all glue. When I say glue, they basically just glue like what is like a managed Hadoop kind of ETL kind of process layer that's put on top of it.
Notice the files, ingest them however
process for doing like for data processing, right?
Yeah.
And so this layer that's on top of S3, which is interesting, which enables you basically to use S3 as a database, which is really interesting because it opens up a lot of doors. But then also we talk about from a resource standpoint, when you're accessing the data, you're just accessing S3. Like you could access it different ways. You could access it if you wanted to interface with, let's say, Athena. You could, like, if you want to kind of inject a query, if for some reason you want to do that and get a result back, you could do something like that through the API. Or if you want to just interact with the data directly, as in load that JSON file in or that Parquet file in, and then read it within a Python script and then do your work on it. Outside of that, you can in separate jobs. And so it makes it much more.
Which is interesting because when you say
modular.
that, it makes me think like you're doing work on like specific documents, which is like I'd say, I think
groups of I would say more of like groups of documents, or like
Okay, how do you find even the documents? Because if you can query the data inside the documents, just something like Athena, how do you know which documents you want to operate on?
I'll just say it's okay. Now I got to be careful about how.
Okay,
we talk about the structure, but like say it's mostly time based.
Okay, I'm just that's all I'm curious. It's like if you're doing an operation document, how do you know if?
So you're talking about when you're trying to update, when you're trying to load in and add more data to the database that you're talking about, like to ingest data
or whatever, whatever you could. Well, I have no idea. I'm just
what the structure that, like I said, from the highest level you probably look at it is for basically there's a time hierarchical,
Okay,
view
so you're gonna care about the documents that were added because then you have to somehow do some type of processing on them to understand or build.
Yeah, because once the data gets loaded into the database with the crawlers, the schema or that's not just the schema. It's also understanding all like how many records are in the database and having some association with that. But every time, let's say you crawl a new partition or crawl a new bucket that usually just a partition that you're adding data to, then it just adds it to that index that it kind of just keeps track of.
Gotcha. So partition. Okay, so if you're saying buckets, so if buckets kind of represent groups or could represent groups of documents, say for a specific customer, then a partition might that represent like batches of data that's been added? Is
Yeah,
that what
I
you're
could look
saying?
at batches. Yeah, that'd be a nice
Okay.
way to put it too.
So it's
Yeah,
like we have a partition. It's not been processed yet, or it has been
yeah,
processed,
you could
or
do that
now
that
we've
way.
absorbed it. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and
This
then,
is fascinating to me.
but
Yeah.
but the interesting thing about the partition though, each partition could be its own data source, which I think that's the real powerful thing. So not just so if you want to specify one bucket to be, let's say, all of your customers, if you weren't just going to do that, but then if you want to then have a multi-tenancy model, then you could have separate partitions, but then each one of those partitions could be its own data source that could have its own permissions associated with it.
But if I had a ton of customer data and I put customer data in particular buckets, so I've got customer A's bucket. Permissions are great because only
Yeah.
only processes that are running as customer A can access them. I could partition, say, like time based. I could partition over months, right? Which might make it easy if I was going to build a query to say, hey, I only actually care about data in the last year.
Yep.
And that,
Yep.
I guess, depending on how you tune things, could be a more performant. Do they call them databases once you treat them as?
Yeah.
And so it might be more performant to ask that wait, what is it? Partition, to ask questions of that partition than my entire bucket because
Yeah,
it's a smaller set of data.
and usually you would do that also with whatever type of orchestration that you are using for your pipeline. So if you use like a step function, or maybe like an ETL job, and then you could then basically just say, give it some rules saying, okay, based on the sequence within a time based, or even if you're not using time, using some different type of, range identifier for your partitions. And then that job then would be able to know which group to look at. But then when it's updating the database, it's just updating the same database. Yeah, and then you would have jobs which we do use, which you have to do once you start keep loading in, you constantly keep loading in data, and you might be worried about duplicate data, which in a, let's say, highly normalized relational database, having redundant data or data duplication is something you probably want to avoid. But when you think about from a data lake perspective, you probably you want to have the ability to go the other way, where you say you just want to worry about just getting your data in and then processing it and then transforming it or moving it from point A to point B, and as it's kind of moving through the system. So what you can do with these jobs there is, as you're working with your transform your data, you can then merge the data together. So if you start to have duplicate data, they can merge together and to process it, so they can make sure you have more of a uniform data set within your database.
Yeah, this is like I say, I find it fascinating because their techniques, I don't know.
And what I'm talking about too,
way to do,
because I'm trying not to stay out of the details, even though
Yeah.
it feels like we're arguing the details. But what the details I'm talking about is really a standard AWS practice, right? How the data lake is structured, especially with Glue and the partitions, everything. Like anybody could do this, so it's like it's not anything specific I'm talking about.
Mark's like, I am totally not.
I'm getting fired. I'm getting fired next week, I think. No.
So if you know somebody who's looking for a AWS,
well, that would be interesting. No, we were talking about it too. Maybe that's how I could sell this, saying that yes, we are going to be looking for new hires. Maybe not in the next immediate future, but definitely in the future. We've having discussions about that, which would be the roles we want to bring in. So
I was processing.
So I could use this as I could use this episode as a way. Okay, if you want just want a little bit of taste of kind of what we do. Here you go.
Yeah. This is recruitment. This is recruitment.
Yeah, there you go.
I was so for those of you who don't know, we just updated the website, right? 5 brand new episodes. And by brand new, I mean, from a couple weeks ago now.
I had to bust out the NVM Node version 16 to get this thing deployed.
Oh boy! So I got some shows online. When I was processing the transcripts and building. So it's probably obvious if you go to devfridayshow.com and look at the not the show notes, but like the, I don't know, what do you call them? Chapters, something like that. Yeah, whatever you want to call that. You look at the chapters, you'll see that's completely generated by AI. I don't even pretend to edit that. So those chapters don't make sometimes a lot of sense, but they at least give you an idea of what we might have been talking about. But anyway, as it's generating that, and something popped up, I think it was when I was trying to get the summary, and it says something like, Tim said the best way to get a job is to already have one. And I'm like, that
Oh,
sounds like the dumbest thing in the world.
but I think that's something we talked about.
Well, I had to look
And
at
it's
the
so much easier to
context.
get a job if you already have one.
Yeah. So I took the JSON structure of the transcript that we get from Assembly AI. I gave it to ChatGPT and I was like, summarize this, and that was the summary. And I'm like, can you give me the context behind Tim saying it's the best way to get a job is to already have one? It was the LinkedIn recruiters. And it's how often, as as someone who has a job, how often you have recruiters pinging you being like, do you want another
and
job?
And I think I talked about this one or two shows ago, the fact of like when you have a job, then you'll get even more recruiters contacting you.
That's the best way to get a job, is to have a job, and then you'll have all the recruiters.
Unfortunately, that's the way the world works. But
so bringing it back to this, though, you say you're not hiring now, but you may be hiring. The
oh,
best
absolutely.
way to get that next job,
because we preferenced him. This is a small team. It's a lot of weight in the small team. So yeah, we're not going to rush into it because we roll off with AWS, but it's definitely something that we're looking, because that's the roadmap of like, we want to build a team. Not a huge team, but like definitely more than 3 or 4 people, maybe probably double its size. So I think, and then it'll be interesting because we're, looking at different roles. Like, we talked about like, data engineers working with, also other cloud engineers to build out certain parts of the platform that we may have. We are integrating more with Salesforce. That is something that we're also looking at too, maybe hiring like a Salesforce developer.
Nice.
Also, yeah.
So the best way to get that next job is to know what you want before you need it. So if you're looking for an AWS kind of data engineer, any of those positions, hit up Mark, find him on LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
Friend him. What do you do? Connect. That's what
you connect. Right?
Yes. You connect.
And I'm
Mark
the type of LinkedIn user who I will most likely accept almost anybody. Cause me, I have a little bit of I like the vanity metrics. So the more that I can build my connections and my followers. Now LinkedIn does cap the connection view of what you have. So if you have more than 500, then it'll only show you like 500 plus, right? So if you have like say 1,000 connections, it won't show you, say you have 1,000 connections, it only caps it at 500. Even I think you can have up to, when I was hiring or when I was looking for a job, I was trying to connect with as many people as possible. And there was one AWS trainer that I was trying to connect with, and saying, oh, he's like, we were chatting back and forth because I was using some of his material, and then I was saying, oh, can we get connected on LinkedIn? It's like, well, I'm maxed out on my connections because I just accepted connections from everybody. I think it's around 2,500. So LinkedIn does have a hard limit of how many connections you're allowed to have. It maybe it's either 1,500 or 2,500. I can't remember which number.
Really?
But there's a hard limit, and so once you get there, you can't accept any more connections. But then you have the followers. So every time you make a connection, they also become a follower. So you do have the follower count, and the follower count though that can definitely go up.
Yeah, because you have right now you have 764 followers. So did you max out your connections, or he?
No. I probably have. If I compare my connection to followers, it's probably my connections are like a little bit less than 600. So definitely over 500. And then then I have like 700. So about like maybe like 150, 160 people just follow me, but I'm not connected to.
So, I see what you're saying. The vanity metrics of 500 plus connections.
Yeah. So as I was saying, feel free to follow me. I like that number getting bumped up, but just so I can even bump that follower count up, I will accept your connection. I may mute you after it, but but we can be connected.
So if you're looking for a job, doing AWS data type stuff, right?
Yeah.
Follow and connect with Mark on LinkedIn before he hits that connection limit, because then it's too late, folks. It's too late.
And let me save my job here, because like I said, if I disclose too much in the beginning here. No, I'm like I said, because we had some other internal meetings and kind of follow up with my boss this week. It was like, I'm actually, this is my other experience from working with a startup,
a
lot about that.
Yep, the genie,
and working with small companies, and also I've worked with a ton of small companies too. So it's interesting too. It's like, this is still a startup, but I think it's probably a very well organized startup. Like, they're very professional, very efficient. Everybody that I'm working with is very smart. It's like, it's great. And that's also, that's coming out of academia. That's all I really wanted. I just wanted to get back to working in IT as a architect developer, get back to writing code that on real products and building, real something real, instead of just teaching or talking about it. And, but also just working with smart people. And I've been really impressed with, like, the people that I work with are really smart, also really nice too. It's like, there's no like, infighting or back and forth. And it's like, it's that the politics are minimal in a sense. You always will have some because of different departments and different groups, but at the same time, I think it's actually overall, I think there's a good camaraderie and a great community that even though it is relatively still small, around 60 people, and most of the company is distributed, which is also nice. If you're looking to get hired for a company, you don't have to, they're not going to be, as long as you're kind of relatively in a close time zone, or if you do live on the West Coast, you have to definitely be willing to have some early meetings.
Okay, so yeah, you cater.
They prefer,
It's like an
they
East Coast
prefer
time zone?
they prefer the East Coast time zone, but we would definitely, well, we work with AWS. Most our consultants were in Seattle, so it's they have to deal with, like, when we have a 10 o'clock meeting, they're up at 7, they're in the meeting, so we would definitely be able to work with that, but it's just a matter of you had to feel comfortable with the fact that we may have, we try to keep the meetings a little bit later in the morning, but at the same time, it could happen. You could have to get online with somebody at 9 o'clock. And if you're on the West Coast, that's going to be, it's going to be a 6 o'clock meeting.
So where should they send their resumes, Mark? Where should...
Just ping me on LinkedIn. I'm going to, maybe my next, or maybe my side gig that I should start is becoming a LinkedIn recruiter. So I think that's where the real money is.
That is, wow. That feels like the 2024 version of, well, I mean, but I also do real estate.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, but I'm also a recruiter on LinkedIn.
I think there are I think there is some people. I was talking to a lady not related to this company at all. It was kind of outside the company. And I can't remember what she's doing. No, she's a teacher now. That's why I had the conversation with her. So she's teaching now, like, even just part-time, like, I think at high school or middle school. I can't remember which school, but it was just in passing. We had this conversation, and because she asked me what I did, and I was like, "Oh, I came from academia, but now I'm working back in IT." And she said, "Oh, actually, I was an IT recruiter." I was like, "Oh, okay, that's kind of interesting," because I've had a lot of experience with recruiters. So I was starting to ask her questions, and she was starting to ask me questions. I was like, and she was asking me some very technical questions too. I was like, "Whoa, you actually know what you're talking about." She was asking like what languages I use, what platforms, databases I use. Like, whoa, okay.
She's trying to place you, Mark.
You don't usually have these random casual conversations all the time with strangers. So I was like, yeah, it's kind of, especially for when she introduced herself as being a teacher, I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. But what she says that she was always a teacher, but what she did, I don't know, or maybe she came from being recruited, but she's not doing much technical recruiting now because she considers the market is soft still. So there's not as many opportunities for her to place people as from a financial aspect. So especially if, I guess, maybe she's doing it more with small firms, or maybe as a consultant. Maybe she was doing recruiting as like a individual and then kind of help placing people with companies, which that could be an interesting business if you can actually build a network of companies that rely on you to kind of act as sort of like a single person headhunter that you can then go out and find people and then get a cut of what they like a hiring placement fee, or maybe take a cut of how much they make on a weekly basis or hourly basis. Yeah, that could be kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is the cut that most recruiters get, if I'm not mistaken, is about somewhere in the neighborhood of, I'd say, about 20% or something of your first year salary for placement.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so that's why, yeah. So if you can place some high paid positions, you could definitely, I think, make out pretty well.
Yeah, and you say building a network of companies that are, but how do you manage the talent pool as in that position? Because,
as in, say again, like, what do you mean by that?
Well, like, to me, I feel like if you're gonna differentiate yourself in that market, it's going to be not just from placing, not just like from being able to place someone in a job, but because if I'm a recruiter and I send 3 or 4 people your way and one of them pans out, but like, it's like, yeah, that was the best of what you gave me, versus I give you less, or I just give you one, but it's exactly the fit, right?
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you have to manage your customers in terms of knowing, okay, these are the smaller firms that use me to find new talent. But then how are you finding the talent and kind of making sure you make the right right match is there, because that to me seems to be the sweet spot.
I think if you specialize, kind of more narrow your lane that you're trying to, find people or find developers like that that's why she's asking about the technology that I worked with, because there are recruiters that only will do .NET or Microsoft. All right. And there may be all the recruiters who do maybe AWS, right? They kind of specialize in that. So then they can kind of know what they're looking for and also have a good repertoire of companies that are also looking for, resources within those that specialize in those areas. So I think the more narrow you get, probably it's easier to kind of manage that. But if the broader it is, if you're trying to deal with multiple platforms, because you know how it is with companies, like usually companies, they may have multiple platforms that are worth to work with, but usually a Microsoft or .NET shop is a .NET shop, right? Or a Java shop is a Java shop, right? It's kind of, they usually will kind of go around. Now we're primarily TypeScript and Python on AWS, which is nice. I love all those things. So when I was looking for recruiters to work with, I wasn't looking like I talked to some Microsoft recruiters, and I was like, and even though I've done some .NET work way back in the past, I had no desire to go back to that. I was like, that's going to be for me to have to relearn a lot of stuff. And I'm like, no. So, but then that relationship kind of stops at that point, in a sense where, I still keep a connection with them, but for them actually working with them, trying to help me find a job, they can't do it because they know that I don't work with that platforms.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting, because then at that point though, you're like approaching the talent pool by saying, okay, I'm finding new people and I'm the filtering function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're trying. Yeah. That just always seems to me to be hard, because how do you know? Like that's part of the thing with hiring to begin with, right? There's a culture fit. There's the the technical technical side of things, which
I think I talked about early on that I found this job based on a recruiter.
Yeah.
So the recruiter found me on LinkedIn. Honestly, I probably wouldn't be working here if it wasn't for the recruiter, because I wasn't looking, because even though I thought it would be kind of interesting, I had an idea of like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if I could work for like an ed tech company, or even, I don't know, maybe a university that was hiring for a cloud engineer or data architect or something like that I could kind of work with, because that would actually be an easy transition coming from in my past experience. But it wasn't something I was looking for at all, because I knew those opportunities were really super limited, right?
Right.
We talk about narrowing your lane or your path you're looking at. That's a super, super narrow lane that you're trying to go in. But the recruiter, that's what he was looking for. And so he was doing LinkedIn searches for, let's say, people who had academic experience and also had IT experience with certain technologies like AWS and AWS certified. And I came up in his results, and then he pinged me, and then we had conversations. Nice. And did some light interviews with him, just kind of so he could understand more about my background. And then he kind of helped me get positioned with the company then.
Yeah. Keith Casey says a recruiting concierge, which
concierge.
Yeah, something like that.
Maybe we could do the Dev Friday.
Oh boy. Whenever you have an idea,
I was thinking of like a fancy name for this. We could do Dev Friday jobs.
Dev Friday jobs, where we bring the jobs to
you. Only work on your Fridays. Like the Fridays when you're starting to check out of work and you feel like, okay, it's a lighter week. You want a little bit of an escape. You want to change your pace.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Think about this as like the Gould 80-20 rule, where like your Fridays could be like your 20% time you take off. Okay, so we could find you a job for that 20% time. That happens only on Fridays.
For the 20%.
There's the elevator pitch for our Dev Friday jobs.
I don't know that that's going to get funded. I'm going to be honest. I don't know.
No, Tim, we're all about bootstrapping. We don't believe in funding. We never got any funding in our lives.
That's
so
true.
Let's.
That's true. Yeah, because to me it's there's this spot of knowing who. The tough part, which I don't know, as a recruiter, seems like it'd be hard, because you've got the recruiter reaching out to you because he sees that you're looking for a job, right? And you fit that profile. Is how do you find the people that aren't necessarily looking for the job but are very talented and would be interested? They're not looking yet, because that to me is a really good position, because you don't have the pressures of on either side, right? You don't have the pressure of well, I definitely need to get a job, so I can from on the talent side of it, I can come into it more like, well, I'm going to see if this is a good fit. And that's a good position to be, because you want it to be a good fit. You want both sides to say, yeah, this is going to work for us. Not like, yeah, no, I think we can make this work. So I guess for me, it's there's a talent pool out there that if you could figure out how to address it would be really interesting, or how to understand it and represent it. Could be very interesting in some boutique style recruiting services. So
Well, you talked about how some of the opportunities that you found is usually when you haven't been looking for jobs, just based on your network that you've built, right?
yeah,
So you made
yeah,
the connections that you made, and so when you actually are at the point in your career, we want to start looking for jobs, you have a network that you can kind of ping and kind of ask around and kind of say, but also you mentioned, I think in the past for your company
flip
too.
side, I have a list of people that I know.
Yeah. So people who
Yeah.
come to you saying, oh, are you hiring? Well, we're not hiring right now, but I know you and I kind of know your work and I think you're pretty good. So let me keep you in mind. So then you have like this Rolodex of
Yep.
Rolodex. Does anybody use that term anymore?
I've got one
Remember the
right
classic
here on-
Rolodexes? I
right
want a
here on
Rolodex
my
on my desk.
I have a roll. No,
You do?
no,
You
I
have a
do not.
Rolodex?
No,
I would
that's
be
a
really
Rolodex. What
impressed.
in the world? No.
I want a Rolodex because I remember
a phone with contacts, Mark.
going to my dad's desk when my dad was a Lutheran minister, going to his desk and like seeing his Rolodex on his desk of like seeing all like the people whatever, all his contacts or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because being a pastor minister, you got to know a lot of people, right? So it's
Yeah,
like he had like
yeah.
a whole Rolodex, and also he was a salesman too, so his Rolodex was pretty big.
Oh my!
So
that's quite the combination.
because all ministers are salesmen in the end, Tim.
Wow.
He did it on the side to make money because ministers don't get paid anything. But I was impressed by his Rolodex. Because I remember as a kid going to it and then flipping through it, because it's round kind of organization of paper cards that were then kind of organized with these rings, and you could just kind of move back and forth.
You
I was
flip
like
it
really
and-
impressive. I was like, yeah.
How did he? Wow, this is interesting. How was his data indexed? Was it indexed on
just
name?
alpha. Yeah, just name. Yeah.
Okay. Because you could also
But also, I was so young. I'm trying to think about this. I think it was probably one of the for like a light remember, but also who knows? I'm probably making this up in my head right now. I think some Rolodexes have have that alpha tab.
Yeah, you could do like
alphanumeric tab, so you can have like
separators,
A, B, C,
right?
D, and then so you can have separators. Yeah, I believe that's what he had. Yeah.
Okay, because you could also I could see, depending on what your use of that is, separating it in terms of context too. Like, oh, I need to find, I don't know, wedding venues. I'm trying to think what what those. Yeah. So that's
we need to bring back the Rolodex. That's why I brought this up. Like, would it be fun for me to have a Rolodex on my desk right now that I can kind of flip through if I need to reach somebody?
Because you just want that feeling. You just want that.
Well,
feeling
as I'm getting older, Tim, and part of our show is just us complaining about us being.
But as you're getting older, we have comments coming in from LinkedIn. So Patrick McKenzie, I don't know if you know who he is. Recently mentioned that by 40, you should have a great network of people in your field. I think that's what a great recruiter. That's true.
That's a good point.
That's true. A recruiter knows the people in the field.
Yeah.
And by 40, you should have a great network. I mean, if this is a field that your career is in, right? You should know the people in that field.
It is, well, especially when you're starting off. I think people or kids, I say kids because I'm thinking young people, kids out of college. It is something they have to learn to develop that network. When we're doing the Lehigh Valley Tech, networking group, we saw a lot of kids from Lehigh, all the universities kind of stop by. It was great to see that. So they saw the opportunities like, hey, I need to meet people. I need to kind of get connected, because if you have that connections earlier on and you start to build those relationships, as we said, it's much easier to get a job or transition from one job to the next. And then also, if you are somewhat good or mindful within your career, and just kind of to keep those, because you don't have to like keep in contact with them like every month or but it's nice. That's the great thing about LinkedIn.
Touch base with them. Yeah.
LinkedIn is your Rolodex. So if I need to go back to a contact that I had, let's say 10 years ago, which we do have a lot of contacts from 10 years ago. And if I want to ask them saying what they're working on, maybe even if I'm looking for somebody to hire, or if I'm even looking for a job myself, which I actually did do. When I was looking for a job, I did go back to some previous contacts and just kind of see what they were doing and what they were working on. So yeah, if you're mindful about that within your career and to build that Rolodex of contacts, so that when you get to be in your 40s and you get to be old like us, then it's much easier.
Old like us.
Yeah. I know, Tim. Wait, why did I brought up the old thing? What was I got distracted there because you brought in a comment.
That's because this is what it's like being old. Mark can't remember why
I
we
can't,
started
I can't.
this-
And also
this
being old
conversation.
and not sleeping, and I'm
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
my
yeah.
mind is like totally fried right now.
So one of the ways though that I found to maintain that network of people is I speak at conferences, I go to conferences, things like that, is because that's how you can maintain that connection, right? Like you said, you reach out on LinkedIn, but there's a
I
lot
want to
of
start
people
doing
that
that, Tim. I want to
that I
start speaking at
see.
conferences.
There's a lot of people that I see.
I need to get that PHP tech talk. I need to put that together. Even though I don't use PHP.
You're gonna break into the PHP community. Well, I'll tell you this: if you're gonna break into a developer community, PHP is the one to break into.
I do have a good idea. I told
really
you about
fun.
my idea for a PHP tech talk.
I'm sure I forgot it, but it had to be.
It was serverless PHP.
Serverless. Oh, you were gonna show how to run PHP on Lambda.
Yeah, how to do a PHP runtime on Lambda, and then show kind of the pros and cons of it. I thought that would be kind of an interesting talk.
Pitch that. Did you know PHP Tech's call for?
But I just announced it now. You know, there's so many developers who listen to our show here, but they're just going to take this idea and somebody else is going to make a pitch for PHP Tech, and I'm not going to be able to do that talk. But
well, let me just check. I think the call for papers for PHP Tech is still open, and you should totally submit that just to see.
I'm tempted
because
I watch they're going to accept it. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to a PHP conference, which I'm like, okay, we don't even use PHP at our company right now. I'm like,
right,
but then you know me, I'm going to feel like, oh man, I'm going to this PHP conference. I should do some PHP, so I'm probably going to have to work in like a project that in my company that can say like, oh yeah, we're using PHP for this one report. And
yeah, there you go. Well, because you could just one-off Lambda it, right? Yeah. So you should totally submit the talk, because I can think of few things that would be more fun than having you and John and Eric at a conference with me.
Well, what I could do, and this would actually be an interesting. Okay. Oh, now I'm getting motivated. Okay,
all right.
Because what I was thinking about doing if I was put together this demo was also to show the performance compared to, let's say, if you had your Lambda with, a Python runtime or with your JavaScript runtime, and then just do a comparison, or even Go maybe, and Go blow everything out the water. But if you have all these different runtimes in a Lambda, and then for the very similar process, right? So like a function that didn't just wasn't a hello world, but it did something, maybe process a file or something like that, or just had some some logic to it, and then took a little bit also time to process, and then to try to clock that. And then compare the times of how fast the Lambda was. How fast is the PHP runtime on a Lambda function would actually be it'd be interesting.
It would, because you would be running. So would it even be apples to apples? Because Lambda has native Python support, and you'd have to be doing some.
You'd have to do a custom run. Yeah, they don't provide native. At least last time I checked, they don't provide native. Think they do. Yeah, I don't think they're ever going to. But
are there huge performance trade-offs, or is what you're doing just it? I guess this is the way to ask the question.
Because if you're going to be doing like a Go, they used to have a platform supported version of Go.
Yeah.
If you want to do that, but now you have to roll your own,
but it's basically all it's saying is like, we either already have pre-configured it, or you give us the configuration, but it's not like it's another abstraction layer higher and somehow Python's closer. No. So yeah, that would be super interesting, especially if you use Lambda to do some things that say Python's really good at. And things that maybe PHP is not traditionally known to be good at, but there's specific PHP extensions, for things like data analysis, which Python's for processing big data, Python's known to be very, very good at that, right? There's some PHP extensions that help make PHP perform.
Maybe good at, may not be the quickest at it, but
it'd be interesting to see. It'd be
well, I would actually think, PHP actually would be interesting. PHP would definitely beat Python. But then it'll be interesting to compare PHP with Go, which I think still Go would probably beat, because Go is compiled. Because when you're running the process, it's a compiled process.
Yeah, you'd hope
that you're running. But PHP would be interesting to see how close they are.
Yeah. No, that'd be a fascinating talk. So how to run it. So here's how to set up a PHP function to run.
And then to sell how, because if you're going to take the time to actually put this together and run it, well, why would you want to do that? Like, what benefit of it? Because really.
There's a ton of benefits outside of performance.
I know. If you talk about the developer experience and the libraries, I understand that.
Well, it's not.
But if you're going to sell, let's say if you have a team that you need to say, okay, I'm going to, like my team, I'm going to do this new API in PHP on top of using API gateway with then lambdas that are then running a PHP runtime on that, and so I'm going to be running a lot of PHP code for the endpoints, and I had to sell that.
Right.
Usually they're going to say, well, why? right? Because we're using Python, we're using TypeScript. Why don't we just use those? What if I could show that there's a big performance benefit to it? That'll be an easier sell.
But I'd argue that that's not even the right market for this, because to me the market is, we're a dev team that writes everything in PHP. So, and we want,
and I'm thinking
we
from
want to
another
do
perspective,
some
because
we wanna start,
that's my world right now. So yeah, if I was going to sell it to a non-PHP team,
yeah, but that's the thing. Like
because in the end I would
there's
just use
plenty of
TypeScript or
reasons
Python.
to use PHP, but if you're not already using PHP, running it on Lambda is not one of those reasons, and in my opinion. But if you're a team that already uses PHP, being able to say we can do some serverless architecture, which, I mean, it's not serverless, it just means you can just execute your code without having to worry about the context of a server, right? But if we want to start playing with serverless, but we don't want to make the jump.
The performance benefits, if there is also, I'm talking about this very hypothetically. I have no idea.
It'd be cool to see the data.
Who knows? PHP could be slower than Python, which, if that's the case, wow, that's really, really bad. But one of the benefits of like looking to Go is because it's so fast, right? It's so efficient.
Right.
It's compiled, and it's such it provides somewhat of a good developer experience because the language is minimal. But at the same time, though, the benefit of using it is the speed. So I'm wondering if PHP could also kind of fall there, because PHP is fast. We know that. I admit that. Yeah. Right. It's a single process. Well, I'd say single thread. Single threaded process that runs very, very fast. And it's just gotten better. And that's why I always get inclined to go back to it. Because if I'm going to be doing a web application, and if I want to be fast,
hard to beat.
Yeah, I always get tempted to go back to PHP for that. So I'm thinking, why can't you bring that performance idea to the serverless and to the Lambda sphere?
So yeah, pitch the talk, man. You should do it, because I'd love to be in Chicago next year, and and have you there at PHP Tech. So that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome.
Oh, I was talking about going back to the old guy the last few minutes here, because reason why I also in my mind I brought the Rolodex, and I always complain I'm getting older, because as I get older too, I'm finding that I like to use more physical things, right? I'm actually trying to step away from using, let's say, devices for a lot of things. I've actually got back into watches, like mechanical watches and like real watches, just because I want to get away from actually using my phone all the time.
Gotcha.
Like I'm getting super old.
Do you have to wind your watch, Mark?
Oh, I have a couple mechanical watches that I want, but then they're automatic though. They're super fancy now, because now you might have to wind a little bit in the beginning, especially if you haven't worn it in a while.
Right. But then if you
it has like this automatic kind of it's not like a slider, but it's like I don't know the technical name for it.
It's a self winder, right? Because
so it's a little metal piece that kind of goes back and forth. It's weighted, kind of goes back and forth. It's pretty cool, because if you look at the back, that has it's opened up, you can see the pieces moving inside of it, and so it actually winds itself if you're just moving your wrist around normally during the day.
Yeah,
but I've gone back to that because it's just that feeling of like I want to just go back to more not less digital, more physical. Yeah, right. The more physical aspects of it, it makes me feel better, right? Because I'm not connected to a screen all the time.
Yeah, I don't think I necessarily express it the same way, but I think
that's why I want to Rolodex my desk.
You want to Rolodex?
I want to be able to flip through the papers. Now, it may not be practical, and I may not what you should use it and write down all these my contacts on a Rolodex, but it would be nice to have just to feel,
just to spin it every once in a while.
Physicality of it.
Yeah. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna build a Rolodex, but the entire thing is gonna be filled with little pieces of e-ink. So you spin it, and it just automatically brings up the contact that you also have loaded on your phone.
Okay. Well, the e-ink, it has to feel like paper, though. I don't want to be like.
You want? Okay. Yeah.
So
we'll put a matte finish on it.
They are getting better with that. Yeah. So if it has some type of paper material feeling, texture to it, I think that could work.
All right. I think this is. We'll launch the Kickstarter pretty soon. So
that's another thing we're real good at, Tim, is Kickstarters. We're great at that too. Just like getting funded.
Yeah. We will. We've got a minute. We got a minute left, and I didn't know if we wanted to talk about the homeschool thing anymore. Obviously not, because we didn't. But I don't know. Maybe that's something that's going to come up next week. But I can't share a lot of this because we're doing like a virtual meeting for the team. And I usually send out boxes of interesting stuff.
Oh yeah, are you gonna send me a box? Am I gonna get a gift?
You are not gonna get a gift because you do not work on our team. Gosh. I know, right?
We talk about building relationships. I started building relationships with a few of your people in your company. Come on.
There you go.
Maybe.
Know me. You know what? If you get out to tech, we'll see what we can do.
Oh if I want a gift box.
If you get out to tech,
I want a burger box.
If you get out to tech, I will get you with my own money, obviously.
Well, Christmas is coming up.
A copy of no. This is if you get the check.
Okay.
And bringing it back, Keith put a comment on LinkedIn that conferences and meetup attendance still hasn't rebounded from what it used to be before COVID, and so for younger workers, building that community is becoming harder and harder. And if you want to,
true,
come out to Tech. Cascadia PHP is in a couple weeks. Get tickets for that. You'd see me at either place.
I took a drink of coffee at the end there. It's like a choke myself.
All right, that felt like we were back into it.
I don't know. Coffee grounds in there. I don't know. For my,
Is that your Costco coffee right there?
No, this is. I actually walked to a local coffee shop that I bought my beans this morning. I do my own French pressing, Tim.
Yeah.
But I also grind it. I use I control the settings of the grinder, so it has like a fine little grain that it's naturally just built to the coffee, depending if you do like a finer grind. So sometimes, depending when it gets down to the bottom of the cup, there you're taking a little bit more of a smooth grind than at the bottom there.
You might get a little extra in your coffee.
Yeah.
So
or ground, I should say. But
that felt. I don't know. That sure felt good.
Well, like I said, maybe I need to get less sleep because I'm not maybe more focused when I have less sleep. That's my goal.
What is that? The Ballmer curve?
The Ballmer curve?
Yeah, you remember that?
Steve Ballmer?
Yeah, don't you remember the Ballmer curve? It's an XKCD comic.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Where it's like consumption of alcohol versus quality of code. And Ballmer, you got to hit that. What happens when you miss it? And you heard of Windows Millennium, right?
Oh man, yeah, I don't do that anymore. Stay away from that. But yeah, sleep. Yeah, gotta get some sleep.
So it's like sometimes words. Insomnia. Yeah, the insomnia curve.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you get the right amount of not sleep, and then you're just right on your technical edge there. All right, we can talk next week. I'll show you this though.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody watches. Maybe I'll hint at it. I'm playing with connecting the serial ports through web browsers because there's the web serial API.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's interesting, and I didn't even know that. Okay, how does that work?
Yeah. So you can see and connect to devices. Obviously, if it's not a local web page, the user has to give you permission.
So it's the browser that has the interface that then in JavaScript you can then interact with it. Wow, I didn't even know the browser had that feature.
That's the thing that would allow you to do. So some apps out there, I'm assuming now I'm jumping a little bit. I'm assuming that is what powers like Make Code and some other applications that let you.
That makes sense.
Visual microcontroller style programming from a browser IDE. Plug in a USB thing and just be like,
that makes sense. Why absolutely.
Because it can find the serial port and then just send whatever data it needs to program the microcontroller. So I'm playing with a little bit of that for a project that I'm.
Look at that microcontroller just keeping the serial interface like alive and well.
Yeah, I know, right?
Jeez, the serial interface is the last thing I've ever think about. But you're right. If you want to do any Arduino or anything
stuff,
embedded stuff, you have to use like a serial interface to connect to your computer or whatever you're using to inject code into it. Yeah.
And even BLE. So
is this like a hobby side project you just kind of doing, or?
No, it's related to the gift for the team.
Oh, interesting.
So I can't.
Look at
I
you.
gotta be careful what I talk about until then.
Nice.
But yeah, I didn't know that Bluetooth, whatever, Bluetooth Low Energy, has a UART. It has UART capability, so you can use that as a serial port.
Wait, remind me again what's UART because it sounds familiar.
I have no idea. Universal UA, I don't know what it stands for, but it's the protocol for sending serial data back and forth.
Okay.
So it's not just connecting via USB and doing serial data over USB, which by the way is Universal Serial Bus. But it's also Bluetooth Low Energy. You can connect and send serial data in the same way, like emulates the same UART communication that you would use to send it over, say, a USB serial connection or any serial connection.
That's fascinating. Yeah, love. Eventually, I would love to hear more about this. I'm super excited because I know I'm not getting one, so I guess you have to like.
I know. I'll tell you.
I'll have to experience this through the show, and maybe John will post his on Twitter, and that's the only way I'm going to be able to see what you guys do. You got-
Wow. Such a disappointing perspective. And I'm telling you, you come out to tech, I'll make sure you get whatever box everybody else gets.
Oh man, now you're motivating me. Darn
You
it.
need to at least submit the talk. The worst.
When is the deadline? When is the
I
deadline?
have no idea. We'll find that out right now because we're still live. By the way.
PHP Tech call for papers.
Yeah.
I did want to do that last year. I just ran out of time last year, and also, I was going through some stuff last year, so I couldn't.
Yeah. I haven't submitted one yet, so I hope it's not done.
So it's May 20th. That's when the conference is. When is speakers? Submit your talk now. Call for speakers. Call opens on August 16th. And then closes November 15th. Okay, that's good. November 15th. That gives me, it's not like the end of this month, so at least give me a little more time.
Yep. Okay, so I gotta get my talks in.
Yep. Because you know me, now if I do some of this, I'm probably gonna really go for it, because then I'm gonna ask you to read it over, and then I'm gonna probably ask John to read it over, and then John's the one that's just gonna decide. So I'm probably gonna get it, and then it's probably gonna happen, and then it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to a PHP conference. Oh no.
There you go. All righty.
All right.
Get it submitted, man.
All right.